Okay, let's get started. Hello, Writers Guild members and guests of the Norman Lear Center for Hollywood Health and Society, our wonderful co-presenter for tonight's program. I'm Dana Weissman, Director of Programs at the Writers Guild of America East. Welcome to OK Boomer, fighting for visibility and career longevity in the entertainment industry. We're happy to have a panel of writers and experts here today who are doing exactly that. In a few moments, you're going to meet our moderator, Judy Tate, a four-time Emmy Award-winning writer and WGA Award recipient. She's written scripts and stories for several TV shows, and her plays have been produced and presented in theaters around the country. But first, let's hear from Mr. Norman Lear himself about tonight's topic.
I would prefer to see more interest in older people, in families that represented, I'm talking about situation comedies, some older people. We did a show last season, that was the title of the show, Guess Who Died? And it was about elderly people living in retirement and so forth. And I loved it, I loved the whole idea of it. And then there was some recalcitrance on the part of the networks about a show that was, was not largely, but almost completely about older people. People in their 60s would be young, people in their 70s and 80s and so forth. The industry is far more devoted to beautiful young people than would you call older people beautiful?
Hi, everybody. How are you?
Good.
Good. We can unmute yourselves. That was a wonderful introduction. Thank you very much. Now let me do the same thing for our wonderful panelists. I'm going to go in alphabetical order. I don't know if we were able to see that. I'm hoping the people joining in could see it, but in any case, if you couldn't, you heard the wonderful voice of Norman Lear. So we have tonight on our panel some wonderful experts in this field. We've got writers, and we've got educators, and we have agitators. I'm going to go in alphabetical order. Ashton Applewhite, just wave, Ashton, so everybody knows who you are. Okay. Ashton is the author of This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism. She is an internationally recognized expert on it, and she speaks widely, including a main stage TED Talk, and she's spoken at the United Nations. She's written for Harper's, The Guardian, The New York Times, and is the voice of a wonderful blog called Yo, Is This Ageist? Which I really enjoy. And she introduced me many years ago to this idea that we actually discriminate against our older selves. Her fuller bio is in the chat, the webinar chat. You could read that. I'm giving everybody a very short bio today. Next, we have Dr. John Holton. John, you want to do? John is a nationally and internationally known, he is internationally known for his leadership in gerontology and is a visiting research professor at the University of Illinois Circle campus in Chicago, at the Adams College of Social Work, where he serves as Director of Strategic Initiatives. Do I have that right, John? For the Center for Social Policy and Research. And prior to being at UIC, he was the director of the Center for Gerontology at Concordia University, Chicago, where he launched one of the country's first summer camps for seniors. I want to go. Do we get to zip line? Next, we have Dr. Paul Nash. You're going to be able to hear his wonderful accent in just a moment. He is instructional associate professor of gerontology at the University of Southern California. He works with the World Health Organization on ageism and has been appointed to the Global Social Initiatives on Aging Task Force for the International Association of Gerontology and Geriatrics. you and John will have a lot to talk about after this, I know. And last but not least, certainly is Mike Royce. You want to wave? I'm making this sound like a game show, right? Mike is a writer and the executive producer of the current One Day at a Time. It's a reboot, if any of you are old enough to remember the other one, which follows 3 generations of the same Cuban-American family living in the same house. A newly divorced former military mother, her teenage daughter and tween son, and her old school mother, featuring the fantastic, fantabulous Rita Moreno. I am such a fan. And is this on CBS?
It is on Pop TV.
Oh, that's their cable. CBS
that's
is
a cable network.
Yeah,
yes.
Pop TV. And Mike was the creator of Men of a Certain Age with Ray Romano, Andre Brower, and Scott Bakula, which I happen to personally love. So I'm going to not talk so much now, but I'm going to get us started off because maybe some people were kind of like me, you guys, and didn't know that there was even a such thing as ageism. So I think maybe we'll start with definitions, you know, and let me start with Ashton and Paul, since you're our resident sort of, you know, advocates and agitators. Can you give us a definition and then talk about how real is it and is it serious? And, you know, what kind of vocabularies, you know, do we have around this? Ashton, you want to talk? Then Paul?
I'm going to let Paul go first.
Oh, okay.
Here's me.
I was being gender weird.
I was going to be all chivalrous and let you go ahead. So essentially, when we're looking at ageism, it's any form of prejudice against somebody based solely on age. So our usual way of looking at this is against older people, but it can just as, well, not quite as frequently, but can equally be against people who are younger as well. So when we're looking at ageism, we have to be very aware it is on both sides. In terms of how real is it? Incredibly real. So it can affect everything from our cognition to our longevity, to our well-being, to our physical and psychological health. It's one of the biggest threats to well-being in later life, and it is one of the least spoken about threats in later life. So I'll pass over to you, Ashton.
I would say we are being ageist anytime we make an assumption about someone or a group of people on the basis of how old we are. It is manifest in our language. It is manifest in our own attitudes. If we don't stop to challenge these negative stereotypes about age and aging, they become part of our identity and lead to self-fulfilling stereotypes, which are, we blame things on age that may have nothing to do with it. The cheesy line in my TED Talk is, I stopped blaming my sore knee on being 64, and now I'm 68. Don't want anyone to think I'm lying about my age, because my other knee doesn't hurt and it's just as old. And for a blistering example of how real it is, think of the initial messaging around the pandemic. Don't worry, it's only going to kill old people and sick people. And the director of the World Health Organization called that out, ageism, explicitly as underlying the lax global response for which we are all paying.
Wow, that's really important. So where do you, and it's great because our partner in this, I'm sure everybody knows, but is Hollywood Health and Society. So where do you see, what differences do you see in, where do you see this kind of ageism coming out in the messages? That's one message. Thank God the World Health Organization leader called it out. But where else in media do you see these kinds of messages? And try to be explicit about it. You know, what do you see that needs to be fixed around this?
Who's that for?
That's for anybody who wants to talk. I kind of want this to sort of be a conversation and less of an inquisition. So,
well, I'll jump in. I would say that media is really the gatekeeper for so much of our information. And so much of what we know about aging is recent information. And so it doesn't really come out in narratives that are complete and that are comprehensive to the phenomenon of aging. So just think that when Social Security was created back in the 30s, the expectation was, well, you're not going to live too much beyond 65 when you can get Social Security. And today, it's expected, if you will, that you'll live maybe 2 or 3 decades beyond the start of being able to collect Social Security. So we've got this real scientifically measured longevity that we're still getting used to. And the messaging around that, still isn't clear. On the one hand, you get this narrative that the individual is solely and exclusively responsible for her or his ability to age well, which is idealistic at best, but it's just not true. And on the other hand, you get
factors.
I'm sorry?
What are some of those other factors that don't allow you to age well, if it's not solely within your power?
Yes, luck.
Yeah, so let's return to COVID-19. When we were getting information about who this disease was really seen to be lethal for, we really didn't have all the information about COVID-19. So today's discussions and stories about the pandemic are talking about how it affects very young people, people in their 40s and 50s, and so on and so forth. So in some ways, we grasp information and we tell an incomplete story. And so we're left with, particularly with an incomplete story, the public is left to say, well, you didn't tell the whole story, so let me fill in some of the blanks. And that certainly encourages this notion of ageism, because there's information that is just not being shared and shared readily. And I think this industry has a lot to do with taking the unprecedented opportunity to educate, but also defend those who are becoming older.
Incomplete also in the sheer omission of older faces and voices in the most literal sense.
Yes.
Yeah. Mike, I'd love for you to jump in there in terms of representation on television shows. I loved Men of a Certain Age. I wish it were still running. I wish there were many different kinds of, shows like that. You want to talk a little bit about that in television?
Sure. I mean, I wish it was still running too, and we still harbor fantasies of it running again, because, the age just gets a little older, but those people are still not on television. And I mean, I always say that, when Ray Romano and I went to pitch Men of a Certain Age, the only reason it got sold was because I was sitting next to Ray Romano, who was a gigantic television star. Yeah. If I had gone into the offices of TNT and said, I got a show about 3 guys and they're about to be 50, and I would have gotten that far till the door, slammed in my face, nobody would have been interested. It's most, well, I'm a storyteller. I'm so far out of my intellectual depth here. It's crazy. So I can only speak to my experience, and and a little observation about the industry. I'm hoping that the incredible stranglehold that advertisers have on content is slowly, coming to weakening. Obviously, the streaming services, Netflix and the big ones, generally speaking, don't rely on ad support. So that opens up a lot of new possibilities that I think, much like John was talking about, getting used to people getting older, the creators and the executives who are responsible for greenlighting stuff are getting used to the fact that they don't have to adhere to the 18 to 49 demographic as much anymore. And so you have a show like Grace and Frankie on Netflix that is a big hit, maybe their biggest hit. They don't tell us the numbers, which is why they canceled us. But anyway, we don't need to get in my beefs. One Day at a Time's on Netflix, the first 3 seasons, for those of you who don't know. And the same thing with the Kaminsky Method, which won, Emmys. These are award-winning shows that tons of people watch because there are tons of people somebody else probably knows the answer to this, but I mean, the largest group of people, right, is the baby boomers at this point, or certainly one of the largest groups. So that group of people are all out there living vital and interesting lives and like to see themselves reflected on television. So people are just learning that, hopefully. Sorry.
Yeah.
They have the purchasing power, which is further reinforces the, you know, the dumbness of, from pure economic point of view, of the ageist attitudes of advertisers and sponsors.
Yeah.
What are some of those ageist images and stories that you want to combat the most?
If I could put one idea in the head of everyone to combat ageism, it would be that the longer we live, the more different from one another we become. All stereotypes are stupid and wrong, of course, but 7-year-olds are a lot more alike developmentally, socially than 27-year-olds, who are way more homogenous than 57-year-olds, and so on out. So the older the person, the less their age says about what they're capable of or interested in physically, socially, emotionally.
And to build on that, it makes perfect sense when you think about it logically, because as we go through life, we make decisions that characterize who we become.
Right.
And the further and further you go through life, like a tree, there are more and more branches that make you more and more individual to everybody else around you. So as Ashton said, the older you get, the more interesting you get, to be honest with you.
So writers who are out there, writers, don't start off your character profiles with an old geezer who blah, blah, you know, right? And have that character have the age somehow fill in for all those specifics that we want to see. Everybody's different and interesting. And so as many different kinds of olders. I love that, Ashton. You were the first person I heard.
solved the problem of what to call old people. Olders and
Olders. Yeah,
and
olders are...
In advertising, that olders only buy cruises or laxatives. You know, there's like older people for the most part like to do the same things that young people do.
I just want to go on record as saying I hate both of those things. So,
what do you like?
Anecdotally, I would take I would happily consume laxatives before going on a cruise. That's like a nightmare to me.
Hopefully not before going on a cruise.
Yeah, no, they shouldn't go.
Mike, I thought you didn't like the term olders, not the cruise.
No, the term olders is fine. I'm just speaking about cruises. Cruises are...
No.
Yeah.
I think we've been, well,
and we're lethal now. Also lethal, so we don't have to go on them anymore.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
So, you know, olders are probably the one age group that spans almost 2 generations.
Good point.
I mean, I don't know when you want to start. Many states start counting people as older adults or seniors at the age of 60. So let's start there at 60, and let's push it to 90. So that's 30 years. There's no other age demographic that expands that length of time. So that's a lot to consider. So back to your question, Judy, about what's maybe one of the worst images for olders. The frail, the senile, the diseased. Those come to mind as images that scare the bejesus out of anyone. And if that's what you're going to become, then you're really going to fight ever getting that way. But how realistic is that? So in terms of what I see, particularly in the advertising wing of the industry, older adults are caricatures. They're minstrels of reality. There was one stock brokerage company that has really way out commercials, and they're somewhat enjoyable because they're so absurd. But when they did the one about older adults, and these were people who still had to work. So there was a disc jockey, there was a package delivery person, there was someone trying to keep up with a factory assembly line. I mean, it was just ridiculous, but they were using this age group to make a point about saving for the future or investing for the future, as if that has a guarantee that you'll be able to live a independent, well-off life, which is on the other end of the spectrum from senility and disease and frailness.
I'm glad you mentioned a spectrum. There are no binaries. We don't go from old to young. We don't go from dependent to independent. We're interdependent, lifelong. We don't go from health is a spectrum. So I will say also, I think it's really important to also portray people who are dealing with illness, with limited mobilities, because those lives are arguably more interesting because of the constraints and just as valuable. And if we pretend that those people don't exist, we feed the ableism, the fear and stigma of disability that feeds a lot of ageism and reinforce that dual stigma. So it's important to bring that out into the open too, and not just celebrate the exceptional older people who continue to be active and physically exceptional.
It's about having that realistic span, as you said. It's about not typifying or characterizing a group, not having them be that, as you mentioned before, that almost a mime of an older adult.
It's great that you brought that up, and I've got a lot of questions coming in here because people are agreeing with all of this, and it seems to be that there are a lot of writers out there. Of course, it's the Writers Guild, and the questions are: but does Hollywood recognize the experience of older writers? Somebody wrote next that they were told that they were going to be kept out of meetings when they turned 48, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So, you know, what's the real story about ageism against writers over 40 and 50? I've heard it's the worst in TV versus features. Michael, I think you can speak to that. Are you typical or are you an outlier?
I would have to, I only know I'm fortunate, you know, I'm 56 and I'm still working, and I started when I was 35. I was a comedian before that, so I didn't get my first writing job till I was almost 35, which I tell people only because as far as the people, you know, when you're 23 and 24, suddenly you turn 25, you think, oh, it's all over, I didn't make it. You know, that is a mentality that some of the youngers have. And so I want to reinforce that you should keep at it, because I didn't get onto a staff until I was at a point when a lot of people would say it's almost too late. And I remember when I arrived here, I was in LA. My first job was on Everybody Loves Raymond, and that was 1999. And then in 2000, I think I saw on 60 Minutes the ageism suit that was being pursued, and all the stories were about I turned 40 and my phone started ringing, and I started crying because I'm like, I'm almost 40. I just started. Like, what the hell? So I didn't have that. You know, I have been fortunate enough to keep going. I also, you know, I've sort of leapt, you know, hit the stones in the giant rushing brook to maybe get all the older people out of the industry, because then I did a show called Men of a Certain Age that was about that age group. So we had writers who were in that age group. And my first, I think, I don't know, cold splash in the, you know, water in the face was the next show that I worked on. I suddenly walked in the room and I was like, all these writers, I mean, I was a showrunner, all these writers are between 10 and 20 years younger than me. Some of them were very young. And it was suddenly feeling self-conscious. Suddenly I was the guy telling the stories who like about the shows I used to work on. I'm just very self-conscious about how I'm sounding. And am I just like, oh, this is now this old fucking guy is going to tell us all his war stories. So, but the answer to the question really is, you know, I myself have had a great experience and plan to continue to. I think that the industry is slowly changing, but it's along the same lines of all the other ways that we need to have representation. You know, there are
helps to be a man, no doubt.
Yes, it you know, only a few years ago it was like considered revolutionary. Like, holy shit, we have 3 women on our staff. You know,
Right.
So now we've moved in mind anyway, light years past that in terms of what you should be achieving. Has it been achieved? Not even close. You know, and this is on all levels in terms of you know, LGBTQ representation and race representation, and then yes, also older writers who can be aged out or can have not gotten a shot.
There's a question to you, Mike. If advertisers are the worst ageist villains, how do we change their attitudes? And I don't know that you know the answer to this. Maybe, you know, Ashton.
That might be better for other, yeah.
I know that Color of Change is an advocacy organization that goes into all kinds of rooms. They've come into to the guild, you know, to raise our consciousness about diversity of ethnicities in writers' rooms. Is there anything that you guys know of, Paul or Ashton or John, where Hollywood decision makers or advertising decision makers can be exposed to these attitudes and ideas?
I mean, I'm always going to give the biggest possible answer because I'm in the culture change business. I mean, take the IMDb example, right? There was a law passed in California in September 2016 that said IMDb couldn't post people's birth dates or had to take them down if actors request it. And it was a dumb suit. IMDb countersued, and they won in this past June. Partly because you can find anyone's age on the web in 10 seconds, partly because the issue is as much a problem of sexism as it is ageism. Remember when Maggie Gyllenhaal made a stink because she was told 37 was too old to play the love interest of a 55-year-old man? And because the issue is the larger culture. IMDb isn't ageist, it's a database. Its job is to provide information. What's ageist is the way people act on this information. They act on it in ageist ways because the culture is ageist. So none of this is going to change in any arena without a grassroots movement to challenge the systemic discrimination that older people face everywhere, just as the Black Lives Matter movement really excitingly is saying, look, nothing is going to change for Black Americans unless we challenge systemic racism. And about ageism, also in the IMDb thing, it's the wrong fight. You know, concealing our age, like dyeing our hair or leaving early accomplishments off our resume, or you know, cosmetic surgery, these are really successful strategies for staying visible in a culture that incessantly tells us that old equals ugly and useless, especially if you're a woman. And Hollywood is the epicenter of that culture. And no judgment, I swear, for anyone who does any of those things, especially women who face the double whammy, the vicious intersection of ageism and sexism. But these behaviors aren't good for us because they're rooted in shame about something that shouldn't be shameful. You know, it would be great if we all had the chops to be like Maggie Gyllenhaal and say, you know, someone said fuck already, so fuck you, I'm the age I am, and this, you know, this sucks. It's not okay. And when we let it pass, we give a pass to the discrimination that makes these behaviors acceptable. So nothing is going to change without a grassroots movement to challenge the underlying culture. That's what we need to do.
So
and to build on what Ashton said there, again, it's about that intersectionality, and that is really, really, really apparent when you're looking at representation. So there's a great study, it was called the Comprehensive Annenberg Report on Diversity, which was done by USC Annenberg. And that looked at that intersectionality of different areas, including race, gender, etc. But the interesting one for this forum would be looking at the gender and age, when they found that it was only 35% of characters across film and broadcast, cable, streaming, everything, only 35% showed characters over the age, not old characters, but over the age of 40. And of that, only 21% were women. So it shows that women are being disproportionately stigmatized and underrepresented in this group. And as such, because they're being underrepresented, they're often caricatured by those stereotypes. So you can't get a range, you can't get that range of characterizations of people to show that diversity if only 21% of that 35% are women anyway. So you need to make sure from that grassroots level, they're making a change and they're saying, actually, we need to represent that diversity.
Someone writes here oh, Mike, were you going to say something?
No, I just said.
Can I say people's names who wrote in? I hope you don't mind. Gil Penelosa. The power of media. For decades, all comedies were mom, dad, 2 kids, house in suburbs, 2 cars. Then Friends came along with young people in cities, successful, no car, and cities became cool. Then Sex in the City. Good-looking, successful women living in a city, no car, took taxi, subway, walked. Cities even cooler. What is the hit that will make olders cool, interesting, knowledge, and acknowledging their knowledge and experience? It's a third of our lives. We must live healthier and happier. And I would argue that Grace and Frankie has made it cool, right?
I mean, it's the same answer for a lot of things. Networks think money is really cool.
Yeah.
So if there's a lot of people watching your thing, they're making money, and networks, streaming networks, platforms. If you can prove you can bring money in, I mean, people have brought it up already, but the purchasing power, the amount of people, these are very money-driven things.
And if you make a good show, people will watch it. I mean, Judy, you were telling a wonderful story in the rehearsal about seeing a kid watching something on their phone or the iPad, and it was Grace and Frankie. It doesn't, if it's a good story, people of all ages will be interested. And if it's not, it doesn't matter what those people are doing.
Yeah, we were talking about that. I'm glad you reminded me of that too. I want to get to some of the writers' questions, but I do want to talk about the how did we put it? I think I wrote it down. I don't know the exact form of the word, but the tiering of our society and demographics so that you can sell to the 18 to 49-year-olds. There are ways in which ghettoizing us by our ages has really started to fray the fabric of our society. And I remembered, I told this story to you guys about how when my daughter was a certain age and she was watching Nickelodeon, she turned to me and she goes, I don't know any older people. We saw an older person in the street. She goes, I don't know any people that age. I'm kind of scared. And I just was horrified. And I said, that's because she's doing her homework. She's watching everybody that's exact same age as she is. And and we weren't in the same, town with my parents. So she didn't have these close connections with older people. And I think that we have seen through cable that there can be a grassroots sort of tearing down of that ghettoization that demographics have put us in. But also a lot of people, so that's one thing. A lot of people are asking me, and I guess, Mike, this is for you and also other people who work with people. It's about writers being hired. The questions are, we don't want to be ghettoized just to writing older people. And how do we get people to see us beyond what our age is? It seems like even in features, agents and managers will not even meet with anybody who is over 50. How do we change that? Well, one, that's age discrimination. And as Mike said, we already had a lawsuit. The former head of our union, or vice head, Jeremy Pixer, won money in a lawsuit. It is illegal. So what do you guys say to people who are saying we can't get meetings, we can't change genres? What do you say?
Well, it's interesting because the complaint about not getting meetings is amongst every underrepresented group. And there's, it all needs to, there's probably as much progress as there ever has been right now. And still it's not even, close to enough. And so that I certainly think extends to older writers. If there's shows that can provably be, there's a few that we've mentioned. And I mean, listen, what I'm working on right now they all involve people who are my age or above. So I guess what I'm saying is, if I get a bunch of shows on, we'll solve the problem. No, it's if you're looking at someone thinking, well, they aren't going to contribute to a show that I think that they can write on, that's a prejudice, right? And it would certainly help to have more shows that represent older people. But at the same time, this is a complaint that I think needs to be, I don't know, we just need to bust through it as best we can with action, because I always say people who look like me, and by that I mean, you know, cis, het, white, male. I've gotten the privilege to write everybody. I mean, not me personally, but people who look like me. And everybody else has only essentially been allowed to write themselves. You know, oh, it's a Black show, so you can write on that. And everybody can write, everybody should be able to write everybody. The problem is that it's only been me who's been allowed to write everybody. And so I think that this is the complaint that you said is, you know, people over 55 or 60 or whatever, of course, many are very talented at writing younger people, just like younger people can be very talented at writing older people. Certainly you wouldn't, you know, a 25-year-old would never say, oh, I could never write, you know, my dad or my grandparents, you know? So it works the other way too. And these are all just, I mean, I don't know how to solve it. I don't have the answer, obviously, other than I certainly hope the amount of, just the sheer amount of shows that there are now and the amount of content provides an opportunity for these you know, 6 multinational corporations that run everything to look at the economics and hopefully, and you know, forget the economics, look at the right thing to do and get people involved, underrepresented groups involved more.
And I have a question too, and it has to do with internalization, and it has to do with how we perceive ourselves as writers. You have a setback, and oh my God, right? Creative people go through this. You know, it's one of those things. You know, there's the systems that are in existence, right? Where Hollywood, and I often even hate to go, Hollywood doesn't want, and we hear that a lot, Hollywood this, Hollywood that, but Hollywood isn't a monolith any more than, you know, the NAACP is a monolith. You know, it's full of different people doing different things, right? And so would you say that just keeping at it and pushing through and not internalizing is helpful? I'm going out to LA. I've worked in New York. My daughter's out there. She's going to have a kid. I've got to help her. And I know how to write TV. Now, you know, I'm old and I love it. And I know more now than ever. And I expect to have a TV job. But, you know, maybe it helps because I've been Black all my life and that was like hard enough. So the age thing maybe doesn't hold a candle to it. But, you know, and also, you know, in my experiences in New York, there was a lot of daytime. So I did that. I didn't just write the Black characters. You don't write just the Black characters. You write everybody. And, you know, and even though a lot of white people were patting themselves on the back for writing Black characters, I'm like, nobody pats me on the back. I write white people all the time. You know, but
Sorry.
No.
Well, I was just going to say, I think somebody else might know better what the progress is on this, but pressure is the only thing that does, you know, they need to, the studios and networks need to feel pressure. And it's worked a little bit, you know, the studies from GLAAD, you know, studies from the NAACP, every time one of those studies comes out and shows just how underrepresented, or in some cases when progress has been made, but mostly look, you know, it shines puts a magnifying glass on what the representation is out there. And I don't know if the AARP has done something like that or another organization, but it would really help to say, look at how few older people are allowed these opportunities. Do a study every year. Maybe it's happening and I just haven't seen it.
It is. But, Paul, is that what you've put into the chat, the Annenberg?
That's about people on screen. So obviously it might be slightly different behind screen in the writers.
Yeah. Well, that's
a simple thing we can do as individuals, because culture change starts with either of us, is when diversity comes up, ask people what they think of as criteria for diversity. And when age is missing, as it often is, say, how about age? And I promise you, no one says that's a dumb idea, or let me get back to you. And that's part of how we change the culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think as we've said a few times, I think one of the key issues is just being aware of it. So if you actually highlight where we see ageism, then actually somebody was going to turn around. So I do this on a frequent basis, as I'm sure Ashton does. If you've got friends, family, colleagues that say something that's inadvertently ageist, when you pick them up on it and they think about it, they go, actually, I'd never thought about it like that. And that's really one of the things about ageism. It's so implicitly inherent in everything that we do, everything we say, even down to, oh, you look great for your age. Why not just say you look great? It's just things that we say that inherently detract from older people. And going back to our internalization of aging, that's what happens across our life course, is we get exposed from the age of like 5, 6 onwards, you get exposed to stereotypes of what older people are. And then you get exposed to that throughout your whole life. And then when you become an older adult and you actually go, oh, you know what, I've looked in the mirror, I am an older person. Well, what about these stereotypes I've acquired across the life course? Maybe they're all true. And then it's something called the stereotype embodiment theory, where actually you start to think, well, I'm now an older person. All older people forget things. And then you start to live up to that stereotype. And unfortunately, then that becomes reinforcing to those younger people that then you, and not wanting to act too much as a sell point. But yeah, that's so there's a model that I'm putting out. This just agreed for publication, called the acquisition, internalization, reinforcement, the AIR model of ageism. And so we acquire, we internalize, and then that reinforces for the younger generation as well.
But these are habits we can break.
These are habits we can break. I watched my mother do that. My mother was vivacious and young and healthy, and I watched her talk herself into being debilitated.
She wasn't young, she was old. She wasn't young, she was old.
Right. I mean, but
right? But she started to think there's a certain way older people should behave.
She had a lot of rules about behavior, about
age appropriateness. That is appropriate for children. And then once you're an adult, there's no such thing.
There's somebody here. Oh, Richard Alvarez says, I met with 2 producers in their 20s, shocked when they had lunch with him and said, "You write young," they said. And I guess he said, because it's in a quotation marks, "I remember being 18. You have no idea what it's like to be 50. Rock on, Richard Alvarez.
Yeah, that's something else we can do, is call out the way we all do these things, but how we use young for insert positive thing and old for insert negative things. I feel young means I feel energetic. I feel sexy. You write young means you write well. For you write young characters well.
You have a good ear. You are in touch with contemporary language.
Use the actual attribute or mood, which is something we can feel or do all our lives rather than attributing it to a stage of life.
We all have to become, oh my God, is it 7:46? We as writers have to become the agitators for a change in our industry.
And as human beings.
And as human beings, the change in our culture, because our industry, do you think this, speak to this, you guys, is our industry the mover, the change agent for the culture, or is the culture the mover and the change agent for the industry?
So let me kind of revert back to something that Ashton said, because I don't think we really appreciate what's occurring now, because it certainly impacts our culture. So, and I want to reference Black Lives Matter. So we saw the protests that erupted around the killing and death of George Floyd. But it wasn't just in Minneapolis. It seemed to spread across the country spontaneously, And then it spread around the world. In Japan, there were marches in which people were saying Black Lives Matter. In Europe, in South America, in Asia, I mean, it was just a phenomenal. So I'm trying to understand, how did this happen in such a spontaneous way? And I think what this did was release an energy to examine our stereotypes and our structure in the way that we are organized. In the same way the pandemic has exposed how we're not really well organized in the US to deal with massive health infections. And so I think this is a good time for advocacy on the part of writers to seek change, because there's something in the air that's really pushing change everywhere. So it may not last very long, but now would be the time to push for change, because I think there's an appetite for it. I think people are willing to examine what has gone unexamined for so long, including ageism and other opportunities that exist in your industry.
If not now, when?
Yeah, you know, we're knocking it down. We might as well knock this one down too, right?
Yeah, because
Knock
and
it
people are
down.
becoming aware of all these intersections as never before. And they're really, sometimes I put it in a slightly geeky way, but how do we, you know, in terms of diversity and intersectionality, people think about racism, which frankly is the cause we should be, that is the primary conversation we should be having right now. But also then, you know, subsequently, and as part of it, it is allied to the struggle for women's rights, to the struggle for older people's rights, to the struggle for queer people's rights. And how do we hitch age to that intersectional sled?
Yes.
Because it is the universal human experience and the form of discrimination we all encounter. Ableism too.
Yeah. Is it, you know, people are asking and saying, well, it feels like not the right time for older writers to be vocal. But,
Well,
you
for
know,
Black
if
writers.
not now, when, right?
Yeah.
If not
The
us, who?
Exactly. The point is, if you don't do it now, when is ever going to be the right time? And the more we don't do that, the more implicitly accepted it then becomes. And if it becomes more and more accepted, it becomes more and more ingrained, and then the problem only becomes cyclical.
I want to tell you two little anecdotes and have you guys respond. When I was working in South Africa a couple of years ago, the choreographer I was working with had no idea how old I was. And so my partner said, well, how old do you think she is? And this was a few years ago, so I was maybe in my late 50s at the time. And he said, oh, 75. And all the Americans are like appalled, right? But from his point of view and in South African culture, that was a deep, deep compliment. And he said that to me, that I seemed much older than my actual number because of certain attributes I had. He felt like I was wise. He felt like I was kind. He felt like I treated the young people with respect and as an equal who were making work with us. And so I'm like, you know, let's bring some of these other cultural attitudes to bear. You know, he wasn't insulting me at all. And I didn't, you know, and I asked him about it and I didn't feel insulted, you know? So what do you guys have to say to stuff like that? Do you see that anywhere? John, what do your elders say?
You know, that's a good story, Judy. I think there are lots of different stories about aging that go underappreciated, unwritten, unexplored, and untold, to the detriment of everybody in society. I grew up in a household that was multi-generational, and no one was old. I thought my grandmother and great aunts were ancient, but not old. which is interesting because they could do anything because they knew everything. They knew it before I saw it, or I turned the corner, or I had an answer for. They had something that was eternal in a way that characterized growing older as not being laden with deficits, but being blessed with treasures of understanding and knowing what perseverance really would give you. So those stories are laying at our feet, and it's to our lack of imagination that we allow them to lay there, and that we are so ineffectual in convincing the industry to take advantage of that, because that's a lost opportunity.
Wow, beautifully said. And you know, as you were saying it, John, you know, people have been writing, what a wonderful outlook. And you have a couple of marriage proposals.
How do they know he was single?
They don't.
It's Hollywood. Anything is possible.
That's right. But you know, people are writing about empathy. They're writing about, John, treasures of understanding. And then somebody writes, is everyone suddenly okay with this term olders? To me, that just sounds creepy.
Well, that's a new one. I like the term. I coined the term because when I was writing my book, I literally got tired of typing older Americans or older people.
Right.
And elders is a gorgeous word. It is used in indigenous communities and a lot of African American communities. It's alien to me, but I like it because it's value neutral. It doesn't imply that older people have more value than younger people. And because it subverts this idea that there's a binary, like one day you wake up old and everything sucks, right? We are older, we age in relation to others. We move along this spectrum always. And I think people know what it means, because I'm happy to hear some of you picking it up. But if it's creepy, don't use it.
what if you're middle? Because that just makes me sound mediocre, which actually is my brand.
You're still an older.
Yeah.
You're still older. You're an older relative to kids, and you're a younger relative to older people.
You're a younger older.
Nice.
You're
Yeah.
a yolder.
A yolder. Oh my God.
Yolder.
That sounds creepy.
Someone writes, what can we do to get Hollywood producers to open their minds that people of all ages, if they are good writers, are worth meeting with? They are missing great stories by not meeting with older writers. I think as a group, as a generational group in the union, we get out there and we bombard people and we create opportunities for them. You know, this is something you guys out there, I'm speaking not to the panel, but to, you know, people out there. We will probably have, I'm so glad everybody is on board with this now. We talked to the, you know, our committee for inclusion and equity talked to Ashton a couple of years ago, and finally we're, you know, we're getting this ball rolling. And we will have a panel of all writers, and we'll be able to discuss in depth more of this kind of stuff. But we really wanted to have a panel where we introduced you to these ideas and brought everything up and had experts in the field, as well as Mike, you know, who is working and writing. People are talking about pipelines.
Well, I just want to say, it's incumbent upon, you know, I'm a person, so I'm a showrunner. I've had opportunities to be in charge of shows for a while now, and it's incumbent upon us. You know, I have a certain amount of power. I can't greenlight my own shows. I'm certainly subject to the whims of the corporations, like everybody else, writing wise. But I do hire staffs when I have a show, and I do as I get older and become an older, I have I know more people, I have networks. So it's incumbent upon people like me and I would just say all showrunners and all people who have had a little bit of this power for a little while to get outside of your comfort zone, get outside of the agents, you know, go on the WGA Solidarity Challenge. These are hashtags, WGA Staffing Boost, and read people who are not in your network, who are underrepresented, you know, and that includes, in this case, we're talking about older people. But just have those people at the ready when you have a hiring opportunity or when somebody else does. And that is happening more and more. People are like, oh, do you have, like, make it happen. You can make it happen. The people in power need to make it happen.
Yeah. I'm giving a shout out here to a group called Age Inclusion in Media. They're a new nonprofit dedicated to championing age inclusion across all media and entertainment. They are happy to listen, to help, and to get involved any way they can. And people out there, writers, you can reach them on Twitter at Age Inclusion, or at their website, www.ageinclusionmedia.org. Will somebody please chat me who's on our, and am I running out of time? I think we're sort of, should we play a game of yo, is this ageist in the Zoom chat? Like, I met with somebody and they said that I couldn't write for 14-year-olds.
We have 15 minutes, I see.
We have 15 minutes? They said that?
There is no time anymore. What are we even talking about?
I know, what is time? So there's stuff in the chat, there's stuff in the Q&A. Lord, I was only looking at the chat. There was so much. Okay. How do you suggest writers handle subtle ageism? I was replaced on a feature job because the producers say they needed someone who could write younger dialogue. I was in a pitch meeting where a development exec said he'd get back to me after he met with a younger writer. He said that, a younger writer. In both cases, my reps told me there was nothing they could do. I think what you should probably do is call Age Inclusion and see. You can also call the union. You can call the Writers Guild and you can get help with these things. In addition to that, Hollywood Health and Society has free resources. They have tip sheets. They've put them in the chat windows. And they have a call center where you can connect with experts.
It's always hard to come up with the snappy answer on the spot, especially when someone says something outrageous and insulting like that. But a really good, all-purpose answer is what do you mean by that? Or even why would you assume that? Why is a little bit more in your face, but I was young once. I have teenage children, or see if you can get them to actually think about why they do assume that and challenge that in a not in your face kind of way. And another sort of general litmus test that is handy on the yo, is this ageist-ometer is, would a similar comment on the basis of race or sex ever pass muster? You can only write Black people, you can only write disabled people. No. Well, then where does the assumption that I can only write about people my own age come from? And if you can say it in a neutral way and provoke a conversation, you might get somewhere. At least you'll change their way of thinking a little bit.
Or maybe we could just take you to all of our meetings, Ashton.
You can never think of them on the only snappy answer I've ever come up with was when someone says you look good for your age, you say, you look good for your age too. And then Good. You have a lot of comments, Michael, about Men of a Certain Age. They're just, people love that show. It's wonderful. Valerie asks, on Men of a Certain Age, Scott Bakula's character was told that he should start directing because there wasn't ageism. Oh, Lake is going to answer this question on ageism there. Is that true? Is that someone, is it true that someone can transition to when, over 40, 50, 60? Do you understand the question?
Right. Yeah, I that wasn't exactly what the dialogue was. It was, I think it was something along the lines of making fun of the fact that old directors are looked at as wise. If you can get to that point, then you're looked at as suddenly you have, which is, in his case, as an actor, you get less of that as a respect, So I certainly would never say there's no ageism in any particular profession, and especially including directing. But that was sort of the principle there. Yes.
Mm. You know, Ashton,
Oh,
one day,
sorry, it's on HBO Max, by the way.
HBO Max, guys, HBO Max. Um, Paul, this probably will resonate with you. Ashton said one day to me that, I don't know how, this is anecdotal. If you solve for ageism, you can you solve pretty much for every other ism, right? And I was like, oh, I don't believe that. I don't know about that, right? Then I was teaching a class at NYU, a playwriting class, and I had smushed undergrads and graduate students together, and there was a very wide variety of ages. And it turned out that it was a really diverse class, ethnically, economically. I was shocked. And, you know, so sometimes that actually does happen. Paul?
I think part of it goes back to exactly what Ashton and I were saying at the start. You look at the diversity of later life, of old age. If we start to cater for that diversity, we're actually starting to make diversity central to the conversations we're having. And if we're starting to enable things to work for older people, then actually by catering to that diversity, we're making it work for people of color. We're making it work for people of the LGBT community. Because we are making diversity that central stand. We're not picking on one or the other or the other. We're not saying, well, this is more important now, this is more important than the other. We're actually saying, well, actually, let's be inclusive. It's not about looking at age as a single narrative. It's about looking at really making inclusivity the central tenet.
Thank you. That's great. A central tenet being inclusivity. I have a question that was asked today. Where did it go? Where did it go? We often, this questioner was curious to know how retirement age has shifted in the last decade. Maybe John, you can talk about this. And if people are working longer by choice, not just necessity, and working in the same field or branching out into other areas. She said that her doctor, a friend of hers, a doctor, was conducting his practice, had been teaching at NYU and was told he had to stop at age 70. He didn't want to. He was enjoying the teaching more than ever and probably feeling wiser and whatever. Is this kind of policy getting more or less common these days? Do you know?
No, well, let me say I don't know specific to NYU, but the upper age limit seems to be being lifted in both the public and the private, the corporate sector. You know, so much has happened in perhaps the last 20 years that it's hard to keep up with it. We had a tremendous recession back in 2007 and 2008, and there were legions of people who had intended to take their retirement at that point, say up to 2010, who suddenly found that their set aside, their 401ks, et cetera, have been wiped out by the run on the markets. And they had no choice but to continue to work because their retirement nest egg had suddenly shrunk to within 4 or 5 years. So I do think people have reimagined when retirement will occur, and they are reimagining what retirement will look like after they actually retire. So I'm glad you asked me that, Judy, because I think there are easily 4 different themes that are in this, that cut across this topic. One is this throwaway generation, or this throwaway group in which you know, everyone is subject to elder abuse or discrimination. And then you have this notion of the vibrant senior and the independent senior who takes trips and discovers new hobbies and passions and has no wants whatsoever. Another theme is focuses on this older worker, the person that I started off describing. You know, why are you still in the workplace? What are you doing still here? And then lastly, there's this notion that there's a demographic crisis that is sweeping the country. The silver tsunami, as the expression, that suddenly we're aging, and the aging of our society is going to be too costly for the society to cope with. References to the end of Social Security, the endangerment of Medicare, so on and so forth. So those are at least 4 different themes that get used to take stories or complaints or advocacy and put them in a preconceived bucket, if you will. So I don't have a better answer for that really excellent question about what happened to the professor at NYU. But I would suspect that if he was at NYU, then given the universities in New York, there should have been an opening for someone with his skill set and talent, because that's the way academia can work.
Mm. I just read a question, and people are writing in so much that I think it's gone by the window, but I think it was Jackie Reingold. One of the comments that she makes is that nothing changes. We were talking about this too on Monday. Nothing changes without concerted, organized, sustained effort. And, you know, so we're talking individually about what we can do as individuals, consciousness raising, learning how to speak up, not being afraid to divulge our ages, you know, getting, you know, tuning up our ears, whatever that is. But also there's organization. And I think that that's a really good point. And it's something that we can talk about at the, during the Committee for Inclusion and Equity meetings.
Can I make a very short plug for a site called Old School, which is a clearinghouse of free, vetted anti-ageism resources. Everything, it's oldschool.info. Everything on it is free except the books. One of the things on it is a consciousness raising guide for called Who Me Ageist, for raising consciousness about age prejudice. We're working on one about the intersection between. There you go, baby. Yeah. You know, consciousness raising is the tool that catalyzed the women's movement, because people came together and realized that these were not personal problems they were encountering, but again, social, systemic problems that we could come together and do something about. And that is what we need to do.
It's true in every movement.
It is.
I am a man. People had to be convinced that
I am old. I am old.
I am old. I love it. I think we're just about out of time. Oh, somebody did write about the okay boomer thing. And what do you guys think about this? Do you think this is a faux fight between the young and the old?
It's a snappy answer. You know, it's like, yo, get with it. It's not, boomer remover is a horrible, vile invective, but it had a very short shelf life. I think okay boomer was saying, look, olders, you need to track what's happening. And I don't think it was vicious, and I don't think it was serious, and I don't even think it was a big deal.
Okay, cool. Anybody else got thoughts about that? Yeah, I hated that boomer remover thing. That really
that is vile.
That was vile.
That's very different though, and it didn't last long.
Right, but it's the age of hearing everything, because there's Twitter. You hear everything. It's like being privy to anybody's, like, you know, anything that crosses anybody's mind. Oh my, you guys were wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it was great. We are going to put in the webinar a survey for you guys who have stayed till the end to fill out. We would really love that on behalf of Hollywood Health and Society. And so I'm letting you know that now. And I'm going to sign off. Thank Paul, Ashton, John Kingsley Holton, Michael Royce, and everyone else, Dana, Leica, Kate, everyone else who made, Nancy, who's back there, who made this happen. And we're going to end with either one or both of the Norman Lear quotes, right? We're going to play them and you're going to see them.
The best advice anybody ever gave a writer, I think it was George S. Kaufman, who said, it was a great playwright, who said the best advice they ever gave was write. To which I would add, and go with your conviction, go with your gut. If your gut tells you this works, this is right, this is what you want, that's the direction you wish to take, go with it.